Okay, thank you. Members, any other questions? Councillor Daniel.
Thank you. Yes, I was interested to hear Councillor Mott speaking about complaints about cleanliness and staff again at the leisure centres, because I was part of the working group in 2019 that did the review of customers there, and one of our recommendations was about cleanliness because that came up as quite a constant topic, and you know, that was before the pandemic. And one of the things that the working group had asked Fusion to look at was employing separate cleaners or a cleaning company rather than having this expectation that the staff would do all the cleaning, because we felt that was unacceptable when they had their duties within the environment of the leisure centre. So I'm just wondering whether that's not happened or whether that's something that's been dropped because of the pandemic. And the other thing was about the management in the centres, that we felt that the managers there were left without any proper supervision to manage the centres, and I'm wondering if that's putting strain on the staff again. They did employ an area manager, but you know, I would like to find out whether that's still the case, that managers have somebody that they can go to when they have problems within the centres. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, Mr. Brooke, whether you would be able to answer that or whether it would be best to get Mr. Parkinson to...
I was going to say, I can answer some of it, but Mr. Parkinson's there, and if he can hear us, he has a lot more operational detail which might be of benefit to this meeting.
Hello, yes, I can join in the meeting. Yes, hello.
Thanks, John. We can hear you. So yeah, could you answer the question around whether or not there's a cleaning contract in place and the bits about the area managers? Thanks, John.
Yes, on the cleaning front, and I know from obviously when the centres reopened following the closures on the COVID compliance, all the centres had a specific deep clean. I think I was there at one of the centres when that was currently taking place. So there is a deep cleaning specialist service that Fusion call on, but obviously in the hands-on operation with the reopening, a lot of the staff were having to get involved as part of their routine in the sort of high-level cleaning and checks taking place. But as previously mentioned, it was from the ONS to have a call on getting specific help from a dedicated cleaning service. So that does need to be picked up. That has happened in ad hoc arrangements, but that needs to be on an ongoing basis. So that will be something that to take forward. As to the case on management support, I know specifically that our area manager, Peter King, is very much hands-on and supporting the team of centre managers across all 6 sites, the 2 sites in West Devon at Parklands and at Meadowlands. You've got to understand as well, there has been a bit of a reshuffle and a change, and in fact, staffing, and I was on a call with other Devon colleagues, recreation officers, as we're aware in the leisure hospitality sector, recruiting staff has been an enormous challenge, but there is very much support and a buddy system with experienced managers to supporting any new managers that are in place. And that's definitely something that I know Peter King, our area manager, supports. And I know actually Fusion are very much wanting to support and recruit within their existing teams, because I think there has been cases where they've recruited externally and there's been sort of a challenge in retention. So I think very much Fusion want to maintain existing staff and support and give management opportunities as and when they arise. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And so I think in summary, I think the support is there, but I think
we need to press them harder on the cleaning contract.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. Thank you, Mr. Brooke. Any other questions, members? Okay, in which case, Councillor Evans, we need to consider an amendment to the recommendations. Mr. Fairburn has come up trumps. The suggestion is that the recommendation should be that the Hub Committee notes the performance of the Fusion contract to date, wider market trends and the financial information on Fusion's performance in 2021. So that item 1 remains, recommendation 1 remains exactly the same. And then item 2 will become defers consideration of the contract variation and changes to the management fee profile pending further discussions with Fusion and a report by the Director of Place and Enterprise to the next meeting of the committee. So that would replace recommendations 2 and 3. So, Councillor Edmonds, are you prepared to accept those amendments as the proposer of the
I'm happy to accept those. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So that would become now the substantive motion. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Cheadle, thank you. Members, any debate? If Councillor Renders wants to make his point now.
There we go. Just the point I was trying to make was, I think I raised the same point the last time we discussed this, as regards to the management fee. We were building it into our accounts. We were relying on it coming in, and my argument back then was, well, what if it doesn't happen? Will we have to keep amending? And eventually, when will we draw the line on it, say it's never going to happen? And sitting as a third party sat back there looking at and reading the notes, exactly what I thought would happen has happened, in the fact that their trading isn't getting any better. I mean, don't get me wrong, we all voted for it, we all wanted to succeed, but my worry is how far down the line do we keep going? Because it is going to affect our revenues, and it always was, and I could never see it happening back then, and I don't see anything changing drastically again. And Councillor Mott hit on it a little bit. The anecdotal evidence from around other places is that they are busier. Now, I'm not an expert on this, and I'm not a gym user, as you can see, but my point is, how far down the line are we going to go with this and keep going with it, really, I think.
Thank you. I think we all share those concerns. I think as far as the medium-term financial strategy is concerned, we are taking a very prudent view, and we will be taking a prudent view about including income from this source. I can say from conversations I've had elsewhere that there are problems with providers up and down the country who are all struggling with similar profiles, I think, of visitors and footfall and so on. I think that it's worth us persevering with this at the moment, but keeping a very careful and close eye on it, as I know Mrs. Buckle and Mr. Brooke are doing. I think, clearly we don't want to get into a position where we are subsidising a loss-making concern. But it is a valuable resource, and I would really want to give it every possible opportunity to get back up and running and at least washing its face. So I don't know whether, Mr. Brooke, you want to add anything to that, but that would be my view of where we are.
Thank you. And then just to support what you said exactly, which is that there are two things. There is one, which is the contractual mechanisms and negotiations that we're going to have with Fusion, and then there is the accounting we will do internally to reflect that decision. And what we're saying is the risk needs to be mitigated, and we'll do that through the medium-term financial strategy. So I, in a sense, I think I support what you're saying.
That's very weird. I can barely cope with one Mr. Brooke, let alone two. Okay, thank you, Mr. Brooke. I hope that's helpful, but I'm sure all members are sharing your concerns, Councillor Renders, and we'll be looking at this very carefully. But it is a useful resource. And I think, one thing I would add is that across the country, the feedback and the research seems to be that those people who are perhaps from lower income groups and more vulnerable do tend to use council-based resources more than private resources. And so for that reason alone, I think it's really important that we try and keep this going and try and give as good an offer as we can at as good a price as we can, and hopefully use it as a community resource. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. It's just an observation, really, that the private sector seem to be doing this really well. And as you say, these centres support those that need them most and those that can ill afford to go down the private route. So I guess my challenge to Fusion would be to up their game and to try and learn from what the private sector are delivering well and to apply that in this instance.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. That's quite a challenge, and I think we clearly would like to work with Fusion in order to deliver that, because it will make it a useful resource, which will help us in delivery of our plan for West Devon. There's no doubt about that. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Leader. It follows on really from the cleanliness, which has been mentioned several times. I'm concerned that what to me is quite an appalling level of cleanliness is going on there, and it begs the question: what is the quality of the water, and what is the quality of the air conditioning, which provides the fresh air for the people who are using that centre? I would like to see our council appointing a specialist to carry out a test of A, the water quality, and B, the effectiveness of the mechanical ventilation, because I think these are critical to the health of the people who are operating it. And I'm mindful that last time, or it was about, I suppose, 15 months ago, Fusion visited us. Part of their savings, they told us, were they were going to lower the water temperature, they were going to modify the water air changes per hour, and they were going to modify the ventilation and turn it off at night and various things. Now, apart from this being quite detrimental to the structure if you start doing that, I'm not sure whether that centre has been returned to the design standards. And the design standards are critical to providing crystal clear and pure water and proper ventilation. So I would encourage us to go to a consultant and say, can you just carry out a simple test as to water quality and a simple test as to the reasonable air changes, and they are governed by building regulation as well. There's a certain amount of air changes per hour, and I'm not totally confident that they are being achieved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we have to be a little bit careful here, as we are going to some extent on anecdotal evidence that has come back to us, and there's been no inspection carried out as far as I'm aware. I think it would be useful to get Mr. Parkinson to perhaps carry out some inspections and perhaps involve environmental health. I don't know if that would be a useful idea, but perhaps we could do that in the first instance and see how that comes out. Would that be possible?
Yeah, just to say that, I mean, all of those tests are undertaken and we have them. So I was just going to suggest that perhaps with the help of some of my colleagues, we can bring you back a sample of some of the recent tests that have been undertaken. So I just want to sort of put a bit of or confirm that there is absolutely no suggestion that the water quality is poor or that the air handling isn't up to scratch. It's reasonable to be concerned, absolutely, but we do have a monitoring, there's a monitoring aspect to the contract, and we do that. So there is no reason to be unduly concerned, but I can give some evidence when we bring it back.
I think that'd be really helpful, Mr. Brooke, thank you. Any other debate members? Councillor Daniel.
I just wanted to say that one of the recommendations that the working group had made in 2019 was that we carried out another review before the end of this council to see, what difference it had made to having that review and what improvements had been made or changes following it. So just to note that the ONS had agreed it at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daniel. That's noted, so we will address that before the end of this council, and we'll ask Mr. Parkinson to set something up. Any other debate, members? In which case, we'll move to a vote on the revised recommendation. So, all those in favour?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. Just scrolling forward to item 10 now, which I think is Okay, it's in a different place, isn't it? So item 10 is the Public Space Protection Order, Alcohol and Antisocial Behaviour, which has been circulated to members again. Councillor Leach was to introduce this. He's obviously not here, so I think I can fill in a little bit of background. This is following a request from Tavistock Town Council with regards to public space around the Meadowlands Park area, where there have been some particular instances of some quite needless vandalism, some considerable expense that they've been engaged in putting that right, and also some particularly nasty instances of bullying and intimidation. And so they have asked us to consider putting in place this protection order. The order is very specific. It doesn't stop anyone from gathering there and having fun and doing things that they're quite entitled to do, but it does particularly relate to alcohol and antisocial behaviour. Is there any other background that we might need to fill in?
No, thank you, Chair. No, I don't think so. I think that covers off most of the requirements. Just that it was, we consulted with we carried out a public consultation, as well as seeking agreement from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, who were both supportive of the proposal.
Thank you. So, members, are there any questions relating to this item on the agenda? Councillor Yelland.
Yeah, I have every sympathy with Tavistock Town Council having faced similar issues in Oakhampton. And I was just really a question as to, first and foremost, whether there's any CCTV in the park. And if there isn't, how will this order improve things? Because where will the evidence be obtained from that there is an issue? You know, is there going to be a greater policing presence? What does that generate?
Thank you. Are you able to answer that?
Yes, certainly, Chair. So the order, if it was agreed, would provide the police with and ourselves with additional powers to be able to tackle the type of behaviour that's mentioned. So that's the antisocial behaviour and generally causing alarm and distress, and drinking or consuming alcohol where it's linked to antisocial behaviour. So it would allow us and the police to be able to issue a fixed penalty notice to tackle that and to disperse any groups as well that are in the meadows that may be sort of party to that type of behaviour. So it grants those additional powers and is an additional measure for tackling that.
Thank you. That's helpful. I mean, clearly the police have the ability to deal with this in one way, but it gives them another option. So that's helpful to know. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Yellen?
Yeah, just a supplemental, really. And I appreciate that it gives them the extra powers to do it, but if the police were there anyway, part of the issue is that you know, clearly it isn't being policed at the moment. But you know, lack of police resources, call it what it will, and whether the town council had given any thought to installing CCTV, which would make a difference, because then they would gain the evidence that would enable the police to be targeted and go in there and deal with it as they do.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on that. I think yeah, with there will be patrols obviously in the meadows to support the introduction of the PSPOs. I don't know, I can't answer the question about the CCTV, but I think the justification is there for the PSPOs in terms of the crime figures and the amount of reported crime already in the meadows. So I think yeah, an increased level of policing would obviously be helpful to utilise those additional powers. So.
Thank you, Mr. Easthope. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. 3.1 of the report says that alcohol must be disposed of or surrendered if requested by an authorised officer. I presume that would include council officers, locality officers, I guess it excludes Tavistock Town Council officers. So my question is, are our officers fully trained to deal with this type of situation, including antisocial behaviour, which could be dealing with a group of potentially very intimidating situation, and will they act alone?
No, certainly not. So I think in terms of training, this type of behaviour isn't one that our locality officers are currently trained to deal with. But in terms of the process of issuing the fixed penalty notice and tackling sort of challenging behaviour, yes, they have the training for that. But this, I suppose, is quite a different type of behaviour. I think the key here is working in partnership with the police to be able to carry out those patrols and provide that additional visible presence within the meadows. As you know, our officers only work at certain times, so they will be effective at certain times. Where the behaviour is taking place late at night, it's going to be more of a police matter to deal with. But I think, yeah, this is all about working in partnership to help resolve the issue.
Yeah, thank you. May I come back on that, Chair? Yeah, that's a very good point. Perhaps more than one of the consultation responses makes that very point, that a lot of this stuff is going on in the evening or at night, which then becomes purely a police matter. Are they, your discussions with the local police team, are they in a position to resource this? And I also note from the crime figures that 167 occurrences of antisocial behaviour reported around Tavistock in 12 months, 63 from the Meadows, but there are another 3 locations which account for 49 incidents, which is a considerable number. So are the police also able to effectively monitor these 3 areas in particular, which account for a sizable number of incidents?
I severely hope so, and I'm happy to have those conversations with the local police inspector. And again, this is around working in partnership, but not just looking at the cure, looking at the prevention as well. I think it's really important to look at the other side as to what activities are available, why the behaviour is being carried out in the first place. So I think that's the other element of this, is to look at why and how and what we can do to give the people that are responsible for this behaviour an alternative and something else to do and to focus their time on. So it's all about working in partnership, but also looking at prevention as well.
Thank you. Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you. My question is whether there's a proposal or a plan to have some form of public relations exercise so that people know that this is being done.
Certainly. So I think, well, the first part of that will be to erect the signs within the space, so that to notify everyone who uses the space what the requirements are of those using it. But also, I think, to carry out those visible patrols, that the locality officers carry out already. I think absolutely to follow those on, and to make sure that we're having those conversations with the public that use the space so that they feel safe in using it. I think that's really important. I also think conversation, so I've had a preliminary conversation with the Academy Trust as well, so that they are aware that this has been proposed, and they wanted to have their say on the sort of the prevention as well, and looking at what's available in the evenings for youth provision and such, that may then help lower the impact of any sort of antisocial behaviour. As well as through our own comms messaging, I think we can promote the introduction of this quite successfully.
Thank you. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not against this. However, I'm struggling to understand how a piece of paper is going to change the behaviour in that area, and how it's going to change the resources and the policing of that. And I'm struggling to see how it's going to make a difference. If the police don't have the power to do anything in the first place, does this piece of paper actually give them that power? And what difference it's going to make, really, and what we're going to do around it. I know you've kind of touched on that already.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. It is quite prescriptive, I think, in terms of the ability for the police they can tackle crime, obviously, but this gives them the additional powers to be able to tackle what may be perceived as antisocial behaviour, so that element of harassment or intimidation that that residents have encountered and reasons that they may avoid the space. It allows them to disperse the large crowds and sort of remove them from the area, as well as using the fixed penalty notice route as well as a mechanism for tackling it if it's not a crime, but it's still against the restrictions that have been placed.
Sorry, I know I'm interrupting you, but why don't they do that already?
So I'm not sure of the police powers, but I know these powers will be in addition, and they will provide them with additional powers to be able to tackle that type of behaviour. So if there's a large crowd that aren't committing a crime, I guess it's knowing what powers the police currently have to deal with it. I imagine that it's insufficient at the current time, so these would provide that additional power to be able to tackle those.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. Any other questions, councillors? In which case, I'd like to move the recommendation that the council resolves to agree the Tavistock Meadows Alcohol and Antisocial Behaviour Public Space Protection Order 2021 as set out in Appendix A. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Cheadle, thank you. And we're into debate, members. So, is there any debate? I'm looking at Councillor Mott now.
I'm going to be good, Chair.
You're going to be good. I kind of share your concerns a little bit in terms of what difference does this make to the role of the police and the power they already have to intervene if a crime is being committed. And I appreciate this is an additional tool in their armory, to mix metaphors, but. Yeah, it's perhaps something that that they can consider doing that is slightly less intrusive than actually arresting somebody. Mr. Fairbairn, perhaps you'd like to add something on that.
Thank you, Leader. What this order does is allow the police to be able to take drink off people. Up to without the order, they're not able to do that. So that is how they go about preventing further crime, because then a person drinking is not actually drinking, is not committing an offence. So the police can't act. Having the PSPO in place allows the police to then remove alcohol from people who are creating a disturbance or likely to be causing a nuisance. So that is, it is extra powers to the police, particularly where there is not a crime being committed.
That's really helpful, Ms. Fairbairn. Thank you. I think that was the answer we were looking for. Any other debate members? Councillor Edmonds.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I guess that slightly changes what I was going to say, because for me, until Mr. Fairbairn explained that point, it was for me, is it a question of powers or police resource? And we all know how stretched the police are in dealing with everything that faces them. I fully acknowledge that. So to me, it's still comes down to what resource is there, and I'm also concerned about the wider area. There are a number of hotspots, sadly, around the town. So I'm happy to support the PSPO, but I still feel that it really comes down to how effectively these areas can be policed, because surely that is by far the biggest deterrent. And that's not a criticism of the police. I think it's acknowledging the incredibly difficult job that they're trying to do. So I assume that as a council, we would work very closely with the police team just to get a good feel of what they are able to do with the additional powers, and can this be effective working with the police with these extra powers, not just in the meadows, but in general terms around the areas that are indicated on that map.
Thank you, Councillor. I think in that sense, it does seem to give the police additional powers, and I think we do need to continue to work with them in order to monitor its effectiveness. So I appreciate your input. Any other?
Sorry, Leader, before we move on, Mr. Luscombe's on the Teams call and has got a contribution to make.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Luscombe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Edmonds, for your question. I think the matter which is specifically request from Tavistock Town Council for the local authority ourselves to consider an application for a public space protection order. That is the subject of the report, and that's what we are seeking to move through that process, as we are legally required to do, to put in place the measures that Mr. Fairburn has explained. I think there is a wider piece to this. The wider piece is around policing in general in West Devon, and specifically here in the Tavistock area. And I think whilst those discussions and matters are related, I think we need to separate the two. We are part of the Community Safety Partnership, where the police have got a very large and committed presence, and it is something that we do discuss with them at inspector level in terms of resources and in terms of crime figures extensively, and they bring a report back to each Community Safety Partnership. The member representation on that partnership is currently vacant because of Councillor Musgrave's retirement, but again, that really would provide, if any member was happy to do so, a real link there into police operational matters and questions around resources. So thanks for letting me come in on that.
Thank you, Mr. Luscombe. That's really helpful. I think it is, of course, something we would probably feel that we would like to support when there are other agencies involved, and we hold this position. Councillor Yelland.
Apologies, it's just a question. Mr. Luscombe might be able to answer it. So essentially, with the PSPO, could that potentially draw down greater resources by the very fact that there is a protection order?
Through you, Chair. Yes, it could well do, and that might be one of the rationales behind the Town Council asking for that particular order to be put in place. Clearly, the fact that we're discussing it today has raised the profile of that particular area and policing in that particular area. If residents make complaints, if there are issues that are occurring which they require a police presence for, then clearly the police will have to make a decision as to how they respond to that. But I would suggest if more people were aware of the issues and aware that the police can be tasked to resolve them, then that demand on the police would increase, and it would be up to the police to then resource that.
Thank you. Is that helpful, Councillor Yelland? Any other debate members? Councillor Daniel?
Get it right this time. Thank you. I just wanted to say I'm very pleased to hear that this will be reviewed if we do decide to go ahead with it, because obviously it's a really complex problem, and it's not just about being punitive towards young people, but they're part of society as a whole as we come out of COVID with all the issues that we're facing. So I'd like to make sure that we do regularly review our decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I would say it's definitely not about being punitive to young people. I know there have been some young people who've been on the receiving end of some rather nasty behaviour in this area, so it's about protecting them as much as anything. Thank you for your contribution. Councillor Crozier.
Thank you, Leader. The situation is centred around Oakhampton. We've heard Tavistock, and in Beer Alston as well. We've had a number of more than enough social problems. It's not the youngsters who go to the youth club, it's older kids mainly. They know when the police come to the village, and most of their activities take place after 11 o'clock at night. A workman in our village spends an hour every Monday morning just clearing up the litter in a very small area, not much bigger than this room we're in tonight, what has been deposited over the weekend. I think we've had a PSPO for our recreation ground. The question I would like to ask, and I don't expect an answer necessarily now, is actually how many patrols have there been to see if that PSPO has been effective? You know, how many times has a locality officer visited the site? How many times has the police visited the site? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's something we'll have to progress outside of this meeting, but we'll certainly have some conversations with Mr. Luscombe and others about that. Any other debate, members? In which case, we'll move to a vote on the recommendation. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, the recommendation. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. If we can move to the Next item on the agenda, which is the write-off report. And if I could ask Councillor Edmonds to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this report covers debt write-offs for the 6-month period ended the 30th of September. Section 151 officer has discretion to write off debts under £5,000 and a total of £50,000, £262.73p has been written off during the period, as detailed on pages 134 and 135 of your agenda papers. Write-offs over £5,000 require Hub Committee approval, and recommendation 2 of the report requests permission for a write-off of one debt for £12,357.71p, and that's due to a business insolvency. Table 3 on page 135 refers. The total of West Devon Borough Council debts to be written off during the first 6 months of the year is £62,620.44p. And I can confirm that recovery procedures have been resumed and are up to date. Table 4 compares our 2020-21 council tax collection rate against the All England and Devon District rates. The West Devon rate at 97.3 compares favourably against the All England rate of 95.7 and is in line or better than other districts across Devon. The business rate collection at 91.5 is below the All England rate of 93% and lower than other Devon districts. The finance team is looking at this situation as the lower figure could be as a result of inconsistency in how business rate collection is reported across the county. So finally, Chair, 2 recommendations: that the committee notes that the Section 151 officer has authorised the write-off of debts totaling £50,000, and secondly, the committee approves the write-off of individual debts in excess of £5,000, in this case, a debt for £12,357.71p. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions? No questions coming forward, in which case, Councillor Edmonds, could I ask you to move the recommendations?
I move the recommendations, which can be found on page 129 of your agenda papers. Thank you.
And could I have a seconder? Councillor Cheadle, thank you. Members, any debate? Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you, Peter. It's going to sound a bit like a well-worn record, this, but I'll keep on saying it until things change. We've changed the structure of our papers to the Hub and Council to include at table 6, a statement on consultation and engagement. This paper says that no consultation or engagement is required. And strictly speaking, that's true, but the public probably have a less than detailed understanding of write-offs, and £50,000 to a member of the public is quite a lot of money. And I think it's beholden on the council to explain these things to the public as they float through our decision-making process. And in my mind, engagement includes that some form of engagement with the public on these sort of issues. So I would ask, and will ask, and have asked our PR team to make sure that as council papers come through, it registers with them that this might be an opportunity to explain things to the public. And so I would like to see in these papers